because that's just meat in the freezer. It's your tag, you hunt how you want. This is Okayest Hunter.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Okayest Hunter podcast. If you're new, thanks for joining. There will be no calls today because this is a pre-recorded episode that is airing live. So I'm assuming that a number of folks that are watching live are going to start commenting, saying, hi, what's going on? And then they're eventually going to do a facepalm and go, oh, he's not responding because this isn't really happening real time. But with the travel I have going on for the last 2 weeks of this month, I wanted to make sure we're still putting out good content for everybody and get some episodes out. So I thought it'd be really cool to reach out to our newest member of our podcast network, Zach Hanson, and bring him on to talk about that podcast and what he's doing with his life and trapping, which is a topic. I think we only had one guest on in the past to talk about trapping, and it was a really cool episode. So there's been a number of folks that have asked over the years, like, are you ever going to do a trapping episode? Can you do a trapping podcast? So here we are. We have one. We have a host. Super intelligent dude, I think. Zach, you're a very accomplished man that has done incredible things. I'm only like a quarter of the way through your book that you sent me because 3 kids, and I'm like, I have these big ambitions to read the book when I lay in bed, and then I don't get to my bed because I pass out in my kid's bed, and I'm like, damn it, I wanted to read that, and I just, a couple nights a week, every now and again, I chip away at it. But thanks for joining. I'll stop talking. Welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate it, and I am very thankful that you said you're falling asleep in your kid's bed, and it's not the matter of you reading my book that is causing you to fall asleep and not get any further.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good clarification point. It isn't. It's actually really interesting, and I'm mostly like, I don't want to say I feel obligated, but I really want to read it because I really want to understand more about this lifestyle that you've chosen to live. Like all the memes that live on the internet of like, there's a picture of a cabin. I'd rather live here than the city, or like, I wish I just go live in the mountains and I hate people and da 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 da. I'm not saying you hate people, but like, you kind of did a lot of what those memes say. Like,
yeah, I did, but the undertone of what those memes don't convey is how hard it is to do it, and all the mistakes and bumbling and fumbling that you do once you're out there. And I think that's what the book actually conveys, is just going from a corporate lifestyle, not having hunting experience, not having trapping experience, to kind of uprooting yourself and going to the most remote livable community in the lower 48, and then just screwing it the whole way and kind of being open and honest about the experience.
Yeah, you're like the opposite of a true mountain man. You're on your journey to becoming one. And I don't know. We love to say failure is one of our best teachers. It is. That's why we emphasize failure with our brand, because you can learn from experts, but you can also learn by doing things the hard way. And you'll be less likely to forget what you learned the hard way if that's how you learned it. And I think you're opening. I don't know if it's the intro or I forget what it's called in the book, but it basically opened up with your first ever trapping experience, and it took me a second to realize what had happened when I was reading it. I was like, oh shit. He had I don't want to say it just now. We can kind of lead into it, but like, you had a huge problem.
Yeah. And those huge problems are very frequent. They're becoming more manageable now, but with less experience, some of those situations you can find yourself in are, overwhelming at the time. And that's exactly how the book kind of opens up a little bit.
Well, the beauty of it is, like, in the moment where like the pain is clenching down and you're dealing with the situation, you thought to yourself, you stood around for a second, oh my God, you smirked because you're like, I'm doing it. This is the life that I was trying to live. I have some of those moments every now and again too. And it's more like around like what I'm doing in this room right now. Like, oh my God, if I could talk to me 10 years ago, I can't imagine that I would be here, So it's always good to stop and appreciate things, even in moments of extreme pain.
Yeah. Extreme pain or nausea or, uncertainty, right? I think that's everybody. And I think this is I was actually writing about this morning, like the pros and cons of social media. And, we're all subjected to seeing lives that we might want to live, right? Whether that's you see somebody with a monster buck on the ground and, with a grip and grin, or you see somebody living the rural lifestyle with chickens and goats and stuff, and you idealize it. And then you're in the moment, like sometimes it hurts or sometimes it's way different. But if you still take the time to stop and think critically to say, oh, wow, I'm doing it. It's not what I expected. It might not be what social media or, a book I read was painting it to be, but I'm here and I'm doing it. And that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, I think we can romanticize about things, and things can look very romantic. And there's a constant expectation versus reality, and that expectation may even be in your own head and not on social media. And then you get to it, like my wife being a stay-at-home mom. I want to be a stay-at-home mom, and then 6 years later, she's like, I don't have an identity anymore. Like, this isn't what I. It's just things. It's just crazy how that continues to happen throughout life and all the different seasons and things that you do. You get to the career that you're thinking, you're like, oh, this is it. I'm finally living that life. And it's like, well, it's different when you're in it versus looking upon it. Like, good point. I don't know. I like where this is kind of going. I think I'm struggling to determine where I want to start or where we should start. If it's go down the Okayest Trapper podcast, or should we start with the book? Because that kind of is maybe what led to the podcast.
I'm game for either way. I mean, we're talking about the book. We can make it short too. I think most people who might be listening, the long story made very short is I was in a corporate career. I've been in artificial intelligence for 12 years now. White picket fence, was going after all the trappings that I was told as a millennial to go after. It's like, get a college education, take on that debt. You're going to get a job, which didn't really happen right away. Eventually bully my way into a machine learning AI role. I'm on a plane all the time. I'm jet setting. I've got my platinum status. I'm flying first class, going to these different clients, going to different offsites. And I hated it. It was not on the surface. I was expressing that I loved it. I was proud. I'm like, this is what I set out to achieve, and I'm achieving it. But deep down, there was always this latent frustration, and I couldn't put a pin on it. And my ex-wife and I, who was an FBI special agent, we were always into fitness. So that was our one outlet. I've always done jujitsu. I was a wrestler, and we focused on all of that. And what started to eke me into kind of the outdoor world was food. And it sounds kind of hokey, and a lot of people might like roll their eyes, but we were the people who were counting macros, which is also extremely miserable, and not something we do anymore. But I was trying to figure out where my food came from. So we were getting down to the nitty gritty of where's our meat come from, blah, blah, blah. And my ex-wife's father was a hunter. They lived in Middle Tennessee, straight in decent big whitetail buck country. And he gave us meat. And I was like, well, this is awesome. It was healthy. It was leaner. And then I started saying, well, how can I do it myself? And that's kind of what opened the door, or Pandora's box, so to speak, even while I was still living in that white picket fence life, to go down that path. And the book is just my chronicling of essentially going through an unexpected divorce, ripping myself out from that lifestyle immediately and moving to a cabin in the most remote place in the lower 48 that's a livable community, and just going all in on hunting and trapping.
And the book is Turning Feral. I don't know if I said it yet or not. And it's riveting how you started, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And I'm curious about a lot of it too. And I mean, you just shared an article on TechCrunch that you had published a number of years ago back onto LinkedIn. I'm like, you can just get into TechCrunch. You can just get into these jet setting lives. Like, it's really fascinating because the higher you fall or the higher you climb, the bigger the fall, or the bigger the tree, whatever the hell the saying is. My God, it's morning time. Don't talk to me in the morning, apparently. But it must have been even harder for you to rip out of that life. You said rip out of the lifestyle. Like, you probably had to just like, I don't even know how you picked a place to move to find a place to live. Like, I can't even think through. There's probably a lot of mechanics and logistics that went into that made it feel like a cold plunge to some degree. Like, just jump in. Is that just your nature? Is that how you are? Like,
yeah, I think part of it is nature. I mean, I've always, if I've seen well, let me put it this way. I have very influential figures in my life, which are my grandparents. I'm very lucky in that way. Both are still alive. into their 90s right now. So hopefully that longevity kind of sticks around and is passed down. But my grandfather always said, if you want to learn something, read a book. So he fostered his love of book and reading and just exploring. And he made a promise to me when I was young, maybe 10, 11. He said, if you ever want, like, I'm not going to give you handouts for anything, but if you ever want a book to learn something new, whether it's welding, whether it's hunting, whether it's wrestling, I'll buy you the book. And he stuck to his word. And I took advantage of it. I'm like, I want to explore this. So he kind of
all your college books.
Yeah. Well, sadly, he did not do that. I had to have 2 jobs to pay for those.
Yeah.
But any kind of outside of education books he would do. And that just led me down a path of not really being afraid to explore new things. So like in high school, I'd been a swimmer my whole life athletically. And I got my ass kicked in high school over a girl my freshman year. And I was against a wrestler and he just whooped my butt. And I had absolutely no recourse. So after that, I'm like, well, I want to learn to wrestle. So I actually became friends with a guy who whooped my butt. And he's like, well, come out to wrestling, dude. And, I just dove right in. So it was just kind of this constant lack of fear. And you build up when you practice just jumping into things, it becomes less burdensome, less
you almost like build a muscle for it or something.
Yep. And so by the time I was almost 30 when this happened, I'd had that muscle, whether it was jumping into a new career in artificial intelligence without a technical background, whether it was trying to build a company and failing and then building another company and being successful. Like it was just this repetition of saying, you know what, a little bit of an effort gene, I guess. It's like, well, we're going to find out. And, it all culminated to that moment where I had the courage, I had the resources at that time to kind of go all in.
That's cool. I mean, the fact that you were able to do it. So you're in Idaho, is that right?
Yep. Atlanta, Idaho. So for those who Google it, it is at the end of a 70-mile dirt road that's either avalanched or rock slid in a lot of the year. There's 38 year-round residents. There's no grocery store, no gas station. And we live right at the base of the southern end of the Sawtooth Wilderness. And it's pretty flipping awesome.
Cool. There's a song by the band Camp, CAAMP. I'll meet you somewhere in Idaho. Mm-hmm. And because of that song, I was like, let's look at Idaho.
Yep.
Because I have these romantic ideas of doing something like not, packing up and moving our kids. And I don't know, maybe it'll happen. Like if any of the companies I have ever tip a certain scale, like decisions will be made. Just, we'll see what that looks like. But it is really interesting because it's something that we as outdoorsmen and women think about often. And some get to participate in certain ways. Like, I get to do travel for work that takes me to some cool places and doing some cool things. And, we put out an episode 2 weeks ago, like hunters kill for content, but I have to do a lot of content shoots and it's fishing or it's hunting this or product that. So it's not like we're killing for content per se. But it is pretty neat that that's kind of what I get to do for my job and what I'm doing here, and get to go. I'm invited to go really cool places. I've met really cool people. I think I probably know someone in every state that if I could probably call and be like, hey, I'm in town. Like, do you want to grab a drink? Do you want to go on a hunt? Can I crash on your couch? Like, I think that would all be pretty permissible at this point.
Yep.
And if I'm ever in Idaho, guess what? I got your cell phone number. Like, guess who I'm calling,
And we got space at the cabin and we got hot springs and we got every game animal you could ever want to chase right at the back door.
It's awesome. So I guess when I was reading your book, you started with like, let's find out where our food came from. That led you down to going to an archery shop. You started shooting your bow with your friend in your backyard. Your wives are making fun of you kind of, but like you did good. And then you eventually went on a hog hunt. Then you went on a whitetail hunt. And so I haven't gotten far enough to know, we don't need to spell the whole book out necessarily, but how it went from all that to like trapping is there's the most woodsmanship involved in trapping. It's like a forgotten art. And that's why I think it's so attractive for a listener base or a outdoor community to listen to, because it's this time that trapping is taking you back in time. It's like, let's get in our DeLorean and listen how to trap. And if you can get an animal's foot in a trap, like the skill that's required to do that, of all the places this thing can walk in the vast forests of this country, you have to pay attention to things that a lot of hunters don't pay attention to at all. And I've joked with Derek, one of our co-hosts, on this, because he'll look at a branch bent a certain way at a certain height and go, ooh, that was a big buck. that made that, because that's a wide rack that wouldn't normally fit through this. It's going that direction. And like, boom, he was on a huge buck because he was, I'm like, I never would have even seen that. I would be a terrible trapper. Like,
no, well, you wouldn't, maybe at first. And I think that's what's so interesting. So to answer your first question, the trajectory, yeah, I started out with archery, hunting big game, and that's kind of what led me out to Idaho. But the reason I got into trapping was opportunity, right? I'm living in an area where you can trap. There's a lot of fur-bearing animals to trap. But in that promise from my granddad to buy a book for anything I was ever curious about, I got a lot of mountain man westerns as a kid. And I'm a history dork, right? You know, I'm not technical from a undergraduate degree perspective. It was like history and political science. And I loved the West. I didn't spend any time out West, but I loved the idea of that manifest destiny of just these intrepid men and women saying, you know what, we're going out West. Why are we going out there? Well, there's demand for beaver for their fur, for hats in Europe.
Yep.
And there is the castor glands to make perfumes, food additives, all that stuff. It is the animal that founded America, in my view. And when I got out there and I started realizing, okay, well, there's problem beaver. There are, you know, other animals I can go after. I'm like, I should try this. I always read about, you know, people with traps over their shoulder. I love Jeremiah Johnson. Like, I have to try it. And that's all it really boiled down to, was I had the opportunity and I was like, let me do this. And I did. I found some mentors. I went to the trapping courses. I joined my local association, and, you know, then I just learned the hard way. And the problem is, it's very difficult. And you articulated it beautifully in a similar way that I do, which is most people are not exposed to trapping, maybe, especially canine trapping and others, is that it's an indiscriminate practice, right? There's no skill involved. It is, you set a trap out there with teeth, which by the way is legal, and you just wait for some poor critter to step into it, and, you know, it's luck. But you said it takes an immense amount of skill and focus and observation to get a canine, think about it, who are actually very, very smart animals, smarter than me, to step on a 6-inch by 6-inch square piece of metal in thousands and thousands of acres of public land. It's dang near impossible in a lot of instances. So that's kind of the journey and the trajectory of why and how I started out trapping. And I think you articulated the difficulty very well.
Yeah, there's got to be like, so the types of traps, the species that you trap, the laws and regulation that go into what you do when you trap these animals. Do you have to dispatch everyone? Do you have to call the DNR? I think about like how the fact that I'm in hunting and I bow hunt and I'm mobile hunting, all this stuff, like, and it just go from here to there. Like, you had to go through the journey to get there and to absorb all of this information that starts to compound over the years. Like, you almost have to have the 101 courses to get to the 102 and the 103. And with hunting and trapping and outdoors, you might be learning a 103, not even realizing it. Like, you might be learning something far more advanced that you're not even ready to like process yet. But it all starts to fit in and work out. And on the trapping side, it seems, I don't even know. There used to be a trapping store in Oconomowoc where I live. There was a store that sold traps, and he's since gone out of business. That building was actually tore down. But I remember going in there thinking like, I'm going to buy like a bow or whatever. I'm looking for fishing stuff or whatever it was. I was like, what's all this other stuff in here? Like, they clearly had a relationship with Stormy Cromer. Like, there's a huge selection of Stormy Cromer stuff, like, and wool. So it was very like this older demographic that was participating in this activity. Just really, really interesting to consider, like, how you enter into this and how you start to absorb, like, what do you need for what species and so forth. And I hope you didn't, you might have froze. I'm not sure. It's that Idaho internet, I think, that might have just locked you up. We'll see if we get you back here in just a moment. There you go. You're back. We got it.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I'm assuming that was me.
It says
hopefully we can.
But yeah, it's okay. We'll just keep rolling.
Yeah, sounds good. Sorry, folks. Maybe we can splice that out.
That's what happens when you live out west. You know, this is part of the journey, right?
Yeah. But you're talking about the traps and finding those in the store when I got cut out.
Yeah, just like, I don't know, with anything, like, how do you approach it? How do you, like, what was the first animal you want to trap? Was it a raccoon? Was it, a rabbit? Was it a beaver? Like, what are the harder ones to trap? You talk about canine, like, and so let's just talk about the lifestyle. Like, what are you working to get on your trap line? How often? I'm to check it every day, I imagine. And then what are you doing with these furs? And I see some stuff behind you there too. So just generally curious about the whole kind of the lifestyle that lives within and around that. I might have lost you again. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
you did. You got choppy. I didn't quite lose you fully, so I apologize.
I have an idea. If it happens again, I have a potential solution. I could just have you keep your video on, mute your mic, and call my cell phone. I can hook it up to Bluetooth, and we could have your audio come through that way. So let's just see how it goes.
We'll hope that it just rectifies itself. I'm going to blame the snowstorm that we have going on outside hitting us on the West Coast.
We have one happening right now too. So maybe it's just the whole internet's just kind of like bogging down. I'm not sure. But anyway, just trying to understand the lifestyle that lives around it. Like, how do you approach it? What are the species? What do you do when you get it? What, like, where is the enjoyment for you? What part of it do you love the most? And just kind of I'm asking like 20 questions at once, which seems to be what I do. So I apologize.
I mean, for me, it's the experience. So you mentioned a little bit about, your friend who noticed one of wider racked bucks walking through an area, and this kind of touches on why I'm very excited about the Okayest Trapper podcast. Is now I have an avenue, thanks to you and the Okayest Hunter crew, to poke some of the best trappers in the United States, people that I've looked up to and maybe have reached out to online, but now have a forum. And even last night, I was talking to one of our future guests, and I asked him. He's a very prolific big game hunter, but he's also a pretty dang good trapper. I asked the question, does trapping make you a better hunter? And he's like, without a doubt. He's like, the intimacy and the time spent tracking an animal. It might not even be the same species, but that time in the woods, which it does take more time, is invaluable to just understanding patterns, understanding how animals think, understanding to his degree, which was very interesting. And folks can listen into episode 3 of the Okayest Trapper when it comes out, is understanding animals' reactions to different IRs and game trail cams. And, that level to kind of really get intimate is just what I love the most. And the fact that you're stepping back in time. I get to go play Mountain Man. I get disconnected from my cell phone. I'm trudging and dragging rusty traps through the woods. And that experience is what I love the most. I mean, all the other elements of, learning how to put up fur, taking care of the animal, selling the fur or tanning the fur, all of that's fantastic too and really cool. But it's really just the fact that I get to play the person who is 1 foot back in the 1800s and 1 foot in the common time with probably an ankle up Jake Paul's butt. It's just this weird dichotomy I get to play.
I think the being back in time part and that I read, what was it? I think it would have been 2020, early 2020. I read Stillness is a Key by Ron Holiday. And that set me on a whole, I'm still on that journey, and it's changed the trajectory of my life. I should probably read that book again. And I got really obsessed with Ego is the Enemy. And I probably read that 8 times now or something stupid like that. But because it always needs so much damn work to keep it at bay. But the Stillness is a Key was like, I remember I went on a hike with my kids twice. We go a lot. We go to this park that's nearby, and we hike different trails all the time. Like, it's really fun. Really big tract, and it's got a lot of diversity, but it's close. So like it can work really well when you have 3 kids. That one's got Raynaud's, and if it gets too cold, it turns into insane drama that boils up out of nowhere, and it's really hard to. It's terrible. I don't have it, but like when my 4-year-old gets it, he doesn't understand what's happening, and it gets ugly quick. So we have to take a lot of hand warmers, and we deal with it. But in any event, we're going on this hike, and he was, I think, 2 at the time. He's 4 now, so 2-ish years ago, and he's picking up like every single pine cone. And I'm like, let's go. We're on a hike. Let's move, buddy. Come on. We're trying. And I had like a destination in mind, but like it was totally arbitrary. It had nothing to do with anything. Oh, there's the stupid something. Anyway, I, I was like, I wouldn't say I was frustrated, but I was, like, come on, buddy, let's go. We got, like, there's more to see. There's stuff to do. Let's go. Let's go. And then I must have read a chapter in Stillness is the Key within the next couple days in between the next hike, and we go. And the next one, I was like, who gives a shit how long this takes?
Yeah.
I'm enjoying time with him. If he wants to pick up every single leaf in the forest, what do I care? He is the epitome of Stillness is the Key. He's like just observing everything around him, appreciating all that he has, and not letting anything else infiltrate his curious mind right now. So like we probably covered like 40 feet inside of like an hour. And I didn't give a shit either. I was like, this is what it is all about. Like you have to have these moments to appreciate things and to stop. I'm always rushing because there's always another thing to go do and that it has to get done, that I have to be here for that thing. And so now I try to carve out these moments where I can be still. And a lot of times it ends up being hunting because it forces you to be still, especially with whitetail. It's you're ambush hunting. You're sitting waiting for them to show up. And so you have no other choice but to be still. And it's those moments in life when like I have the most clarity around anything I'm trying to problem solve around, or making decisions, or just level setting and let my batteries go back to neutral for a change, because the technology and all the lights and all the traffic and all the stuff, I think it does wear down on your senses, and it's not all bad, but it can't be all great. Like it's really cleansing to be outside.
I agree. And I'm very fortunate because I had to manufacture a situation where I had access to that. Like I was so far down the path of busyness and living a quote model 21st century lifestyle that I had to move to the middle of nowhere where I walk out my front door and there's no cell phone service. Right. So I had to manufacture those situations, and now I get them all the time. And it's a lot easier for me to jump back into that stillness, because it's that whole idea of a monkey mind, right? Like if you meditate and you've never meditated before, it's very hard to kind of still the mind, right? The more you do it, the easier it is. There are situations where it's easier to still the mind, like maybe hunting, maybe sitting in a tree, maybe, being in a place where you don't have distractions. And that's what it took for me to kind of re-level set and realize that a lot of what is pushed on us is right and necessary is not. And I just had to expose myself to that and the consequences that come with it in the fullest way. And I think that's just a personality quirk of mine. Like I have to do it. Otherwise I will find a way to distract myself, and that's not healthy, but I've been working on it, and it's an ever evolving work in progress.
It's a human condition thing. That's why there's a book that speaks to millions of people that they all resonate with when they talk about stillness being the key necessarily, but like can't even sit in a car for 5 minutes in silence. Like we got to have something distracting us from our own selves. It's really strange. But I guess, I don't know, let's switch up a little bit and talk about some of your trapping experiences. I mean, the first one that you wrote about in the book, I think, is a fascinating story. I'm sure there's plenty more that I've never heard about that might be more interesting now based on the time that was published.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's been a lot that's come out since the book, right? I mean, I'm running trap lines all the time. I mean, wolves are cool, right? I mean, that's a big problem out here in Idaho. There's a whole hullabaloo about them releasing them in Colorado. Yeah. Folks listening to the Okayest Trapper podcast will inevitably hear a lot of conversations around wolf trapping and the conservation aspect of it, and the pros and the cons, all that great stuff. But I have fallen in love with water trapping, beaver, otter, muskrat, the whole lot. And part of that is the nostalgia, right? Like I live on the middle fork of the Boise River at the headwaters, so not far out my door I can be in the water, and we have an abundance of beaver. In fact, Atlanta, Idaho, I was the highway commissioner for 2 years, and there were times where nobody was trapping and beavers would build dams, flood the road, cause millions of dollars of damage. And, as a small office, we didn't really have money to fix it. So it causes a lot of problem. So it gave me reason to go and trap. But one of the coolest experiences I've ever had, and this is the first, well, I'll tell the story and then maybe people can put the pieces together a little bit. But I knew where beavers were, and I knew this problem area where they were about to flood the road. So I worked with Idaho Fish and Game, and I had a kill permit to be able to take these beaver out of the specific area, because prior to, as a highway district, we had just taken a backhoe all the way down there, cleared it out, and inevitably, 2 days later, they built it 30 feet upstream or 30 feet downstream. Beavers are very resourceful. So I was heading out of Atlanta to go to Boise for something, probably a doctor's appointment. And, 3, 4 a.m., I was planning to set some traps on my way out. And so I pull up to where this dam had just been rebuilt and my headlights are on the water and I see eyes. I'm like, oh, cool. There's a beaver right there. That's, it's really cool when you actually get to see him in real life. So I get out of the truck and I walk up on this mound to look into the water, and this beaver swims right up to me and like lifts his head out of the water, which is really strange for a beaver to do. I'm like, I've never seen that. Like, this beaver's fearless. And I'm like, all right, well, he'll go back into his, their bank den or wherever he's at, and I'll go put my waders on. So, it's 5 degrees. I'll go put my waders on, grab my conibears and my foothold traps that I'm about to set. And I wade into this chest deep water, which is kind of on the backside of the dam, because I was going to do a dam break set. And for those who beaver trap, beavers love their dams. And one surefire way to get them to come to something is to break their dam, because they're going to come rebuild it. And I'm sitting in this water, or standing in this water rather, and all of a sudden I feel something thump my chest. And I was like, that's weird. And I looked down and I had a headlamp on because it's dark outside. And this beaver is swimming all around me like at lightning speed. And I'm like, I had no idea beaver were this fast in the water. And, beaver can get to 60, 70, 100 pounds where we're at.
Big. I've seen the pictures. I'm like, that's huge. It's like bigger than my dog. What's going on? I never pictured a beaver be that large before. So yeah.
Nor had I, but they can be huge. And this one didn't seem too big. I'm like, I don't know if it's just like a silly juvenile or a kit, whatever it is. And it's swimming around me. I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. And I ignored it. I was like, it'll go away. It kind of splashed the water, and ended up making my sets. And thankfully, this was during the actual beaver season. And beaver season happens to overrun otter season in my unit. So I came back the next day, and on my drowning wire, I had this beautiful, like 33-pound otter that ended up being stretched 5.5 feet from nose to tail. And what had happened, and I hadn't known it, was that was an otter. These kind of playful, super fast swimming animals that I was actually in the water with, which I'm really glad it didn't attack me. But, it was playful, and it was going around, and it was just getting to interact with that was one of the coolest things that I've ever experienced on my trap line, even though I didn't know what it was at the time.
There has been a weird number of otter attacks. So you wouldn't consider it. My kids watch that Zootopia and the otter attacks, and they're like, an otter, a cute little otter? I'm like, wow, that's really come to fruition in the real life. What the hell's going on?
I know.
Otters
all those recent ones lately have been a little bizarre, but I mean, their nickname are river wolves, right? And when you do skin one and pull one out, like, you look at the teeth, the structure, they do kind of look like little wolves with short feet. It's like a dachshund almost, but but that swims and is violent. And for us in Atlanta too, on the river at the beginning of our little a fish ladder, right? We have a little dam for us to do some co-op electric for the town, and they'll just sit at the bottom of that fish ladder and just gorge themselves. So, there are some elements of like conservation control for both the fish and the otters. And, you can go down a rabbit hole of all the different conservation aspects of trapping, but, it's an interesting critter, and it's a really cool one to kind of interact with.
I've only seen otters in the wild once, and I was on a river float, which much is like how they came to attack someone, but they were just running around on land, and I happened to catch a glimpse of them, and I was like, holy shit, otters. I was freaking out. Freaking out. Everyone's like, what are you freaking out about? And it's like, there's otters. I've just never seen an otter in the wild. And my buddy Greg, who does the show with us, he's gotten otters on his trail cam, like a group of them, and I'm like, how freaking cool! It's just seeing certain wildlife like that is really fascinating, I think, because unless I feel like most people have seen a lot of this type of wildlife at a zoo, but that's probably about it, or on Nat Geo or something. Otherwise, maybe you see a skunk or you smell one, or you've seen deer in a field or squirrels run around or bunnies. But other than that, like I've never seen a wolf in the wild. I've seen, I think my dad and I've come across their tracks in the Nicolet, Shawinigan Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin. I think they're maybe around up there, more so now probably than when I was up there over 10 years ago. But bear, I think my dad's been treed by bear before. So when you say there's all these animals and you're really kind of back in it, like you're not the only predator out there. I mean, I know they're not chasing you down per se. They're likely more scared and reserved. But like if you come up one in the wrong way, it could get weird, you know.
Well, as an example, we have about 5 wolf packs that run our unit and around our area, and it's probably too long of a conversation. Like I said, on the Okayest Trapper, we'll cover it in depth over time. But the wolf population in Idaho is way above the carrying capacity. And, you can see it in the ungulate population. And I went out to an area where most wolf packs are on like a 25, 30-day cycle, where I ran into the same pack within a 7-day time frame. And even the other night, my wife was putting our daughter, we have a split level cabin and there's no inside access. So our daughter and son sleep downstairs. We sleep upstairs. So she put our kids to bed at like 8 p.m. She was coming upstairs back outside, and I was upstairs doing something, and she kind of pulled me out. She's like, Zach. And I came outside, and a frequent occurrence, you just listen and you just hear wolves howling, doing their roundup call, within a mile of our house. And they're out there, and you see tracks all the time. And it's always impressive because we have a 130-pound Cane Corso and a Shih Tzu. Those are our 2 guard dogs.
I've seen your dog online. Those are big dogs.
Oh yeah. Big dogs. They were the Roman dogs of war. And, honestly, I would take the Shih Tzu over the Cane Corso if it were like in a fight to the death. Like the Shih Tzu would probably do better against a mountain lion than the big dog. But nonetheless, his paw prints are huge, like in the snow. And it's always impressive when I see his paw prints. But then you go out the wilderness or not far from town and you see wolf tracks. And they don't dwarf his paw prints, but they're still noticeably bigger. And you're like, wow, these are humongous animals that are just out there roaming and eating and, pushing game around. And it's pretty cool. Like you were alluding to.
I think there's a level of eeriness to it. I went, my wife and I are camping up north, on my aunt and uncle have a property that they have a camper, and they're like, do you want to sleep in the camper? I'm like, no, we're going to pop up a tent. I think it's just cooler. We're out here. Like, let's just hang up a tent here and it's no big deal. And there were wolves howling. My wife's like freaking out and howling. Let me back up. There's 2 different times we heard wolves howling when we were camping. That was one of them. A different one was there was a bunch of coyotes yipping off, and then a wolf howled, and the coyotes shut up. And I was like, whoa, whoa, that was really cool. But I was obsessed with wolves as a child. Like I think I read every book that existed on wolves. I knew weird things like their fur is hollow, like their speed they can run. They have they have a thumb. They're the only canine that can actually grab their prey like a cat can. Their dew claw is like a digit that works. They eat bone. So like people are like, oh, pit bulls have this grip. I'm like, well, last time I checked, a pit bull's not eating a fucking bone to get the bone marrow out for for their protein. And like just really interesting creatures. I could understand 5 packs. Packs are large. Like packs get up to 12 or more in some cases, right? Like
yeah, it depends. I mean, they're packs with 5 in them, but last night I had another person who's a wolf trapping expert on the show, and she was telling me like the gestation period, wolves are still dogs. Like people see 3 in a litter, but they could have 7 or 9. It really is variable. So these packs grow. Some are small, some are big. It just
knowing that there's 5 around you that could be somewhere from 5 to 10-ish. That's an eerie feeling when you're out there, And if you ever catch a glimpse of one, probably get your heart pumping a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Knowing that you see one, there's more, and it's like, well, shit, where are they?
Yeah, and immensely smart. And all these animals and critters are way smarter than me, which is always the biggest eerie factor. But I'd love to hear from you too. Like, for those who've never heard a wolf howl, like within a mile or two of them, it is I don't want to oversell it and say that it's a life-changing experience, but I, like you, was always obsessed with wolves as a kid, reading Call of the Wild, all that stuff.
Wild, White Fang, all the Jack London. Is it Jack London? I think I'm the.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what was that feeling? Because the first time I heard it in the woods was the first time I was ever elk hunting and out west, and I heard a wolf. And like you said, you hear coyotes, you're like, wow, that kind of sounds like a wolf. Maybe that's a wolf. And then you hear a wolf, and it's like zero question. And for me, like every time, it's like the hair raises on the back of your neck. Like you can't not get overwhelmed with like this, I don't know, like innate human nature of like fear. You're like, that is impressive and scary.
It's rare for us to be at the apex of the food chain to feel like we've been knocked down a peg. And I think that's what happens.
Yeah.
You hear that and you're like, oh shit. Like, it's not just me out here that can do things. It's this other thing out here. And there's many, it really is. It's a very, it creeps into your soul a little bit, and not in a good or bad. It's just in a way, it's indescribable. Like you said, unless you've experienced it, it's really interesting. But when you're that deep in the, I don't know, in the wilderness, like that's a whole different thing, because things can go sideways quick. Like maybe they're not gonna come out and get you or anything like that. That would never be a fear of mine, other than like if I freaking break my leg and I'm stuck out here, now we have a problem. It's the a friend of mine, kind of friend, Christian Schauf with Uncharted Supply. He's been on the show, and on the show he talked. His company is like, they create bug out bags and first aid kits that are pretty robust. And he's like, it's not the big disaster that like our kit's going to save you from. It's the blister that's going to turn into a mega problem if you don't treat it. And it's like these little things that can exacerbate and create these huge ripples that will then cascade into big problems. And it's things like that when you're in an extreme situation that can get out of hand quickly, because it could be really cold out. A blizzard could be coming. Like you could get lost or turned around, and suddenly now, like what was a little problem has become a really big problem. So the story you shared in your book, where you got your hand caught in the trap, like thinking through, then it suddenly becomes very important. Like, what is my next step going to be? Because it's very important I play it out correctly, or it could be bad.
Yeah, and I think the nexus of that was living the white picket fence life, always having that kind of inner dissatisfaction with what that was actually like, led me down a path of fabricating hardship, right? To feel. And whether that was jujitsu or running ultra marathons or doing any of the things that I used to do, it was all an attempt to manufacture that. But I could always tap out. I could always quit a race. And I think what I was always pining for was that feeling of, experience that our forefathers and the people who founded the West had, which is real consequence for action. Like you said, like you have to be prepared. You have to know, or at least have the fortitude to figure out what the right next step is, because, hand caught in a trap and a storm's coming or anything like that. Like, or you roll your ankle and there's a wolf pack around you, like your next decision really actually have an impact. Like hopefully you never actually see the negative side of that, which might be death, but backing yourself up against that corner, at least for me, was, empowering to kind of really have consequence for my actions and feel.
Yeah. I think adversity creates character. And there's all these quotes about like, hard times, make easy, weak men create hard times. Like cyclical. And so there's this yearning. But the book Into the Wild, the famous story of Christopher McCandless, who deemed himself Alex Supertramp, was like, it's important to test yourself at least once in life. And there's so I love when I'm 30, gonna be 38 now. I'm a dad. It's like a little bit different. When I was young, I was constantly testing myself. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was manufacturing things. I was skydiving. I was doing all sorts of cliff jumping and weird shit. And I remember one time, this was not a test. This was not me trying to do something stupid or exciting. I just was dumb and didn't realize that I was in Oregon. and I was just chilling on these rocks at Cannon Beach, and I've never been to the ocean. I didn't know. Of course, I've heard about tide. I understand what tides are. I'd never
Mm.
experienced it, and it came in so fast that I almost had a really serious problem. Like,
Mhm.
I was far enough out over all these pretty dangerous rocks, and the water levels were rising at a rate that I was not anticipating or expecting, that I almost didn't get out. And it was
Yeah.
like I was getting thrashed around, and I was like, "Holy shit." And that was a moment of, like, pure now all cylinders were firing, every muscle fiber was gripping, and I was like it hit me that this is now dangerous. And then
Mhm.
you go into this fight or flight or, what have you, and, it's rare that we get into situations like that in modern society. A car crash or something like that, where you don't realize like, "Oh, the roads are more slippery than I thought in the snowstorm. Whoops, here I go." But cars are safe, like, by and large, you know? I don't know, so I think when we talk about trapping, there's so much more that goes into it than the trapping of an animal, much like hunting is more than the killing of whatever you're after. It's everything else. And not everyone
Yeah.
trapping
And
is out west doing it how you're doing it. There's people here in Wisconsin trapping muskrat in some swamp, but, like, if that bog moves or you step in the wrong mud hole, like, you could have yourself a problem, you know?
oh yeah. Or approach the animal that's in your trap the wrong way. I mean, talk about beaver, talk about muskrat. Like, they're mean critters. You can get bit in real quick.
Yeah.
And I caught an otter the other week that was in a live trap, and I had to wrestle it with my catch pole, and that was the strongest animal I've ever felt on the other end of a stick. It's just impressive the power that a lot of these animals have. But that's why I'm excited about the Okayest Trapper, because you mentioned at the beginning, not only the input of what it takes to trap, but there's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of laws. There's laws and regulation that differ between species and between states. And, you can catch bobcat in one way in one state and not in the other. And that can be very overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me when I first got into it. It's like, okay, what am I targeting? What are the rules? A lot of the rules are kind of nebulous and like left to interpretation. And if you're like me, who's later in life to hunting and you didn't grow up around it, I'm kind of like a letter of the law kind of guy. Like, I like to be more spirit of the law, but I am definitely letter of the law. And like, I want to know black and white what I'm supposed to do. And oftentimes that's not really available clearly. So I'm hoping that this podcast, having experts on, having other people who are novices on, talking about their failures, talking about some of the troubles that they've had, will at least open the door for more people to maybe explore trapping. Like one of my good friends, who's from Soul Seekers, also on Carbon TV, he messaged me the other day and he was trying to target a bobcat, John, and he didn't get a bobcat, but he got a skunk, and it was his first animal trapping. He's like, I feel amazing. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. I sent him videos on how to put a skunk out that was going to keep it from spraying. And, he skinned it out. Now he's going to tan it, and he's hooked. And I hope more people kind of get into that to realize this is another avenue that's often open year round for you to kind of continue to sharpen your skills or explore the outdoors in a different way.
Yeah. I there's definitely a lot of interest in it, and I do believe, when you look at the numbers, like, the first episode did really, really well, like we mentioned before I hit record, and so I think there's a pretty big appetite for, to quench the thirst of the knowledge of learning about this, even if it's like kind of the narrative of like, oh, if I learn about this, it'll make me a better hunter, or maybe I'm curious, or I want to go back in time and hear about some of these stories. And even if, like, there could be historical episodes about Theodore Roosevelt or whoever, the people that helped build this country and live that life and founded all these things. Like, it's like beavers built the country off there's an economic boom around beaver pelts. Like, it's all really, really cool. I'm very excited to have you on the I'm calling it a family of podcasts, or an interchangeably a network. But I really do think it's a family of podcasts, because I know every host pretty damn well. And if I don't, I'm getting to know them well, and they know each other. And the more we're doing this, like, you might talk to Paul Campbell, because he's doing all this history of the turkey throughout the duration of our country, and how, like, the Osceola turkey is named after a general from Florida, or whatever. Like, really cool things. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to sum up that I'm excited. I don't even know what the hell I'm saying here. Again, I'm off my.
Well, I'm excited too.
I'm really. It's freaking cool that you've done what people, I think, romanticize about and want to do. You've done it. That in and of itself is interesting. Then you throw in the trapping stuff, and then you're talking to these other experts that are doing it. You do have an okayest mindset about things, and you've had some hangups. So I think that approach is good, because if you're going to try something new, you have to be, like, I don't know, vulnerable is the right word, but like, you have to be willing to know that you're going to make mistakes. Like, that's how you're going to get there. And if you're not willing to make mistakes, then you're probably not going to learn anything new. Like, you can't just stay, I mean, you could, you ought not to just stay exactly where you are because you don't want to look stupid. You have to be comfortable with willing to look stupid. And stupid might be too strong of a word, but it's okay.
Not for me. That's my moniker.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I think that, we talked about the fear of regulation, the fear of learning the law to figure out how to do it in the first place. But then we live in a world where there's judgment, right? If you're especially if you put yourself out on social media, you have every Tom, Dick, and Harry with an opinion, good or bad. And it takes a toll no matter what. But if you can go in with the mindset of like, those are just people in the ether, and I'm here to do this one thing, and I accept the fact that I'm probably going to screw up along the way, it is net positive. And what I will say, and being an adult onset hunter, an adult onset trapper, the community in the trapping world, and not to knock the hunting world, has been way more open armed to new folks in my experience.
It's further,
because I've been on both sides.
It's so much further down the progression of, like, it's where hunting could end up. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but like, hunting is a very small subset of the overall population.
Mm-hmm.
Bow hunters are a smaller subset of the hunting population. Trad bows are smaller. Trapping is a super small subset of all of those things. It's just so much further along. So I think it's almost like it's always funny what I'm going to say on a public forum, but like, it's like you go to the Catholic Church and there's like all these old people in the pews, and they're just so excited. They're shaking your hand. It's so good to see you young folks here. We need you to keep our church here because, like, no new people are coming into it. So the mindset being further down is like, yes, I would love to teach you. Like, you're going to make mistakes. I was there. Hunting is still not to that point. And I don't know that it needs to get to that point. I'm not saying, it sounds like I'm saying this in a bad way. I struggle to explain things or articulate, but it seems as though it is an older way of life. It is something that could, like, have some revitalization, and therefore the perception is very different coming from someone that's in it more so, right? Maybe that's where open arms are coming from.
Yeah, and I think the articulation you actually made is very on point. And I think folks, whether they decide to get into trapping or not, at minimum should join their state's trapping association, because trapping is kind of that last bastion of a way of life that is at risk. And for instance, New Mexico banned trapping, I think 2 years ago now. And like, there are other states who are now kind of, ignoring science, ignoring the conservation aspects of trapping, and being reactionary to, videos or social media and saying, nope, trapping bad, and blocking it. And that's the fear, because it's kind of like a little domino effect. Like, obviously us in the trapping community are doing our best to fight that in an appropriate way that is based in science, statistic, etc., and do that. But hunters need to keep a quick and close eye on what's going on in the trapping world.
That's
they're trappers, because it could do the same thing. And
because it's been around longer to some degree, or there's more history, the lineage is longer, so it's further down the line. It's on the same linear path as hunting to some degree. They're just, trapping is further ahead because it's had more runway, is how I'm still not positive I'm articulating this the way that I intend to, but in the polls, hunters lose every day. Trappers, I feel like it could be like stepping on an ant in comparison to fighting an otter if you're the the voting community. And I actually wonder if that could be not a bad thing, because it's like, it's so insignificant, like, just let the people trap, it's not causing anything. But there's already a really slanted purview of hunting, and we talk about this on the show, and it's obviously no whole other topic, but like, how people present themselves on social media has an impact, because it's not that we care about the antis. You're not going to convince those folks to become for hunting or pro hunting or pro trapping. It's the middle that you're going to convert to antis rather than inviting in. And trapping, I feel like, because it's so ancient in a modern perspective, that it probably is like, ooh, trapping bad, ban it. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's got to be all sorts of, I don't even know what the public perception of trapping is, other than like, I don't know if it's viewed as worse or better than hunting. It's definitely a topic that I think would be worth exploring. I think it's one that I'm really enthused about, but I'm also like I'm closer to the category, you know?
Yeah, and we will, because it is interesting. And there's a lot of groups. And like one of the things that I've done this year, which is really interesting, and I'm actually going to have this gentleman on the podcast. He leads up, U.S. Wildlife Fish and Wildlife, which is a DC based association, and they do what they call BMP trapping, which is best management practices. And so since like 94, they've funded all these studies of different types of traps to help in the lobby for trappers' rights. Meaning every year, like a Midwestern coyote trapper, they might say, hey, we want to check the efficacy of this foothold trap. So we're going to ask that you go out and you foothold trap these coyotes, and essentially you send them to us at a lab, and we're going to check the injury rate. So you'll scientifically log where it was, the time the animal was in the trap, and then you'll have a scientist kind of measure the injury essentially to that area to say, okay, had this animal been a non-target species, or had this animal been released, would it have survived? And the answer almost always is yeah, and it would have been absolutely fine.
Yeah, animals get clobbered by cars and do flips and they get up and walk away.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they survive because I don't know, but like animals are tough.
Yeah, they are. But we're doing that stuff. So like right now I'm doing a survey with pine marten where I'm live trapping them, and doing a similar thing, live trapping, dispatching. There's a co-fund where I'm actually sending the tongues to a University of Montana PhD study. I'm swabbing them for COVID for a CDC study on COVID in predators. And there's a lot of science that's going behind all of this to say, hey, people have a reaction that says this is unethical, or it's torture, or it's cruelty, and the reality is it's not. And that's what we're trying to build up. And I know hunting's in the same boat. And like you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with storytelling. And all of us, whether hunters, trappers, everybody probably needs to up-level their storytelling game to kind of help lean that middle of the pack over to, oh yeah, this is actually an ethical, positive thing that we're doing across the board versus the opposite view.
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly. Brad Luttrell with Go Wild and Holler Commerce was recently on the Hunt Quietly podcast, and he's like, hunting doesn't have a social media problem. Hunting has a storytelling problem.
That's exactly where I just hijacked that from, by the way. So shout out to him.
Same thing. He's amazing. I love listening to how he argues points, because he does come from data, and his platform is interesting because like, well, you're a social media platform, isn't that bad? Well, no, but there's no non-hunters on the platform, so it's one big echo chamber. Like, you can post grip and grins, and you're not going to get that off kilter approach from someone that doesn't understand it. There's a lot of context in that community. It's really interesting. We've been a partner of Go Wild for the last year, and friends with those guys for several years, and Brad's great, and I really like that positioning, and I think it's true. I don't think you're going to get a whole community to be better at storytelling, but it's good to think about. Storytelling's hard. The fact that you wrote a book is hard. Like, I can't finish a sentence while I'm talking to you, let alone I'm writing something. Like, I know there should be a beginning, a middle, and end, but I'm like beginning, and then I start over here and I'm eating cake. I'm like, what? How did that get into the story? It doesn't make any sense. I can't finish a thought half the time. So yeah, it's just interesting.
You and me both, man. But we're on the path, and I hope folks who have a latent interest in trapping, or some of the history and just modern reflections on what it means to be a trapper, enjoy it. And the crossover between hunting, I hope, is large, and I hope we can pull some folks to give it a try too, and go to their local hopefully not shut down mom and pop store like you, but like here in Idaho, we have the best store on the face of the earth, which is called Rocky Mountain Fireworks and Fur. You can go and buy all your fireworks and all your fur trapping equipment and lures that you want in the world. So hopefully people will go find those shops and go pick up a trap or two and give it a whirl.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. And obviously this is broadcasted live, but it's not running live. I'm saying that, but Same thing for the following week. I'll find another guest to bring on and record ahead of time. Greg and Derek talked about doing a studio takeover. I don't know if I trust them with all this equipment in here to do it correctly. So we'll see what we come up with. But if you haven't already, go onto Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast, check out the Okayest Trapper. And if you're on Spotify or Apple, anytime you're listening to any of the podcasts on the network, you should be able to see all of the other ones in the same lineup of recommendation. So explore the network and see the other ones that we have on there, and let's welcome our new host, Zach, to the family. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on.
All right.